ARL 1930 to 1949. New Zealand didn't play any overseas test matches between the disastrous 1926-27 tour of Britain until the Kiwis returned there in 1947-48, although New Zealand sides visited Australia in 1930 and 1938. Auckland's internal activities were subdued. The Northern Union Cup was lost to South Auckland in 1930. Auckland only played Canterbury and West Coast once in the 1930s, and rugby league was struggling in Wellington. In 1931, the number of Auckland senior clubs were reduced to 7: City, Ponsonby, Devonport, Ellerslie, Marist, Newton and Richmond. They received a share of the gate takings to reduce the dependence on the generosity of honorary vice-presidents. Auckland's Interclub Rugby League Championship winners have for the last 77 years been recipients of the Fox Memorial Shield. This is named in honour of Edward Vincent Fox, who died in 1930 after finally succumbing to a wound suffered during the First World War. Fox was an outstanding member of pre-war North Shore backlines and represented Auckland against the 1914 England touring team. That the Northern Union Cup was sitting somewhat uneasily in Auckland's trophy cabinet became evident when Northland almost snatched it away in May 1930. The Northerners led 8-0 and 12-11 at half-time. An intercept try to Maurice Wetherill got Auckland in front, and the game concluded at 21-16 to Auckland. Auckland then went on to later lose to South Auckland 13-12. Heck Brisbane was described as easily the best back. It took the combined talent of Devonport and Marist to subdue Sydney-side Eastern Suburbs in 1931. Marist had won the 1931 championship, the first for the Fox Memorial Shield, and Devonport the Roop Rooster and Stormont Shield. The combined team won 14-13 in a thriller at Carlaw Park, and the park was packed for the occasion. 1932, where England beat Auckland 1914. Auckland fielded 12 players who had or were to wear the Kiwi jersey, as did 3 reserves against the England team. The British combination, captained by the legendary Welsh and Wigan fullback Jim Sullivan, who'd already won the Ashes in Australia, were unbeaten in New Zealand. Its toughest contests were against Auckland 1914 and the third test against the Kiwis 2018. England fielded an entire test backline, and 3 of the 6 forwards who had shared in the 24-9 defeat of the Kiwis the previous Saturday. 1933. When West Coast visited Carlaw Park in 1933, Bert Cook crossed for 3 of Auckland's 6 tries in a 29-22 victory and helped make Richmond the dominant club of the 1930s. Bert had an illustrious career in rugby, where he played 44 matches for the All Blacks, and he was lured to rugby league by astute Auckland businessman and future New Zealand Rugby League president Jack Redwood to play for his Richmond club. 1934, and Richmond became the first club to win the Fox Memorial, Roop Rooster and Stormont Shield treble in 1934. They were also unbeaten in 4 matches against visiting Australian club teams from 1934 to 1939. 1935. Auckland made its only South Island tour of the 1930s in September 1935, beating West Coast 32-14 in Greymouth and Canterbury 26-13 at Monica Park in Christchurch. The Auckland backs were too slick for their opponents. Veteran Bert Cook and Lou Brown were the stars. The Kangaroos were a rare species on New Zealand Rugby League grounds before the Second World War. Their 1935 team was only the second, 16 years after the first. 5 of the 6 matches were played in Auckland, the other in Wellington. For the first time, both Auckland City and Auckland Province were included in the tour. Australia beat Auckland City 16-8 in front of 15,000 spectators, and Auckland Province were convincingly defeated 36-15. 1936, England 22, Auckland 16. The Lions, having retained the Ashes in Australia, were unbeaten in their 8 New Zealand matches. Only the first test against the Kiwis, 10-8, were they more seriously extended than in the 22-16 victory over Auckland, which opened the tour. Monaco's achievement in winning the 1936 Fox Memorial and Roop Rooster were extraordinary. considering the team didn't even exist at the end of the previous season. The catalyst behind the formation of the mostly Maori Manukau squad was Steve Watene, an inspiring utility who that season became the first of his race to captain New Zealand. 1937. Surely only one man has played sport at Carlaw Park and Eden Park on the same day. In April 1937, the Auckland Rugby League Gazette noted the enthusiasm of Verdon Scott, a young North Shore three-quarter, who dashed off after his game at Carlaw Park to knock up 22 runs in the final cricket match of the season at Eden Park. Scott was to achieve the highest honour in both sports. 1940 to 1949, the war years. Rugby league in Auckland was just entering its fourth decade when, for the second time, New Zealand was into a world war. Britain's declaration of war on Germany coincided with the start of what was to have been the third tour of Britain and the first visit to France. In 1942, amalgamations were introduced to the Auckland senior competition. It was decreed that Manukau, Ponsonby and Richmond would stand alone, but there'd be amalgamations between Marist and North Shore, Mount Albert and Newton and City, and newly promoted Otahu. North Shore, the 1941 champions, were a reluctant marriage participant, and Marist soldiered on alone for a few weeks before they eventually united.